Hi, everybody. It's Debbie Aldridge. Welcome to the show. Once again, I have a guest that I'm so excited about, Mubin Shaikh, and I hope I said that correctly for the audience. But welcome. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And I thought you said move and shake, so I thought maybe I should start.
Moving and shaking. Yeah. Well, Mubin, I have been following you for some time, and we've been following each other. And what really struck me about you, besides all the credentials, and you're correcting me on one thing. It's counter intelligence. Um, how did you
Intelligence operative, not officer.
operative, not officer?
Yeah,
So
no
just
stolen valor. We don't do that.
that's right. But you do a lot with our U.S. military in training and intelligence and counterterrorism. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm extensively involved with the U.S. military in that regard.
Yeah, it seems like I see you coming and going from places that I was just at, and I was like, "Oh darn, I just missed you." But you're so busy, you probably would have had time to connect. But we've been following each other for some time, and what really struck me, folks, about Mubin and why this is really, really important is Mubin is Muslim. He's going to tell his story here soon. Um, Most of you know I spent 7 years in the Middle East myself. I did not have a bad experience. It was a different time than this kind of caliphate thing that we're in, but or we're in with ISIS and Al Qaeda and all these um, more recent situations with extremism, and we're going to talk about extremism. But Mubin, he tells it like it is. He plays no favorites. It doesn't matter who you are, what religion you practice, what the color of your skin is. He's going to call you out. He's going to call out radical extremism, no matter who they are, because this is a scourge on societies around the world. And there are many, many victims. And we're going to hear from Mubin his story and how he got to where he is today. So, Mubin, I'm going to let you take it from here for right now. Let's start. Let's see, let's start at the beginning. Um, you were born and raised, I believe, in Canada.
Yeah, that's right. I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada. My parents are from an Indian background. They kind of settled in Canada in the early 70s. Really, in the 50s and 60s, when you started to see a lot of these independence movements happening in different countries. There was a lot of migration movements at that time as well. A lot of, people from the Indo-Pac subcontinent went to the UK, of course. So they kind of been in the UK a little bit longer than they've been here in Canada. Um, of course, Muslims in the US goes all the way back to like slave times, really. But I was born here, raised here, and by daytime I would go to public school where boys and girls were mixing. It was a caring, nurturing environment. I think you have a picture of that of
Yeah, I'm going
me
to
when
put
I was
that
in.
slideshow up right now. Folks, you just saw a slideshow that I took at the Spy Museum, which I meant to mention at the beginning of the show. Is I just came back from Washington, D.C. I was there for the Free Iran rally. And I knew one of my goals was to get to the Spy Museum because Movement has two, maybe officially three, and he can talk about that, displays there or presence there at the museum. And the film they show as you walk in, there is a segment and it's narrated by Morgan Freeman, and it goes through, intel and everything. And then you hear from movement, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And then I knew there was a second one on the, so you take you to the fifth floor. I knew on the fourth floor there was another one. I searched for that and found it. So the slideshow was from the display of movement at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., and it's really worth a visit. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take it from um, where you just left
Yeah, the
off.
public school that I went to as a kid, right? And this was a complete opposite and contradiction to the evening school that I went to, which was a Quran school. And so I always talk about, the way in which you view the world as you get older is largely influenced by, the upbringing that you undergo through your parents, through your religious communities. So if you're like a Christian out there and, you send your kids to Bible school from a very early age, this is what people of religion do. They send their kids to religious schools. So I went through one of those. And the problem with our type of schooling is that you would get, slaps and punches and beaten if you read the Quran wrong or, you made some mistake. And so this kind of started to create the foundation for an identity crisis that would hit me later on in my life. And when I got to high school, um, I wasn't bullied, I wasn't picked on, I wasn't the victim of racism. We were actually the cool kids of the school. And, it's a stupid story, but it's funny. I mean, I had a house party basically. And when my parents had gone out of town, I called everybody over. Everybody came over, and it was the rockin' party until my uncle walked in to the house and basically just blew up, pun not intended. And he totally lost it, obviously, because this was his brother's house. I had defiled the home. I mean, he told me, people pray here, they recite scripture here, and you're bringing these kuffar, these infidels, basically. And so I was embarrassed, ashamed, full of guilt.
But kind of a
And so,
typical teenager of that
well,
time.
yeah, I mean, in
I
the
mean, I
Western
think most
context,
of us know people that had parties in their homes when
yeah.
their parents were out of town at some point.
Yeah, and that was in this Western context, we kind of see it as a very benign teenage experience. But coming from this, super strict Muslim family, coming from an old world culture where, look, they do look at whites and say like, well, we don't want to be like them, right? And because we're gonna talk about this, that whole mirror imaging that we do, right? Like we have racism in our cultures, right? Like minorities are racist towards other minorities, towards white people. So it's a common thread. It's a tribalism, right? That really it comes from. But in this shame and guilt, I basically decided I'm going to get super religious, and that's how I'm going to fix myself. And it's very similar to like the born again experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Christian tradition,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
I've been there.
John.
I've been there.
Yeah, well, and you see how
And we
people
kind
are
of
like,
do that when we know we have sort of fallen short and we want to repent and.
well, all sin and fall short the glory of God, right? So I decided I'm gonna get super religious, and that will basically fix my reputation and salvage my life. So in 1995, I was 19 years old, and I would go to India and Pakistan on this religious trip. And as part of my travels, I ended up in a city in Pakistan called Quetta. And Quetta at that time was the stronghold of the Taliban. Now, just a quick chronology from 1979 to 89, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. There was a great fight there. The Americans were involved, the Saudis were involved, and the Russians, of course. By 89, when the Russians left, the Americans also left, but the Saudis stayed. And 4 years later, after the civil war between these jihadi groups, the Taliban emerged. So it was at this time that I basically ran into them. They had taken up positions in the tribal areas of Pakistan, and that's where I happened to be. And this young kid from Canada seeking this new religious identity, when I saw these guys, I became enamored by them, right? And I thought to myself, wow, these guys are like the legit fighters, the vanguard of Islam, defending Islam from its enemies. And so I became enamored by them. I only stayed there for, a few weeks. So I didn't go and join the Taliban or take training with them. It truly was a chance encounter that I had with them. So that one time that we started talking, and then another time They came back to the mosque that we were staying at. I personally think they thought we were spies, and until they realized that, okay, these are actually, guys who came from Canada on this religious trip. So I would return back to Canada in the fall of '95, at which point the Taliban had now come to power in Afghanistan. And so I started to see this on TV and took this as a validation of their worldview. They did what they said that they were going to do. And so I became a supporter of the Taliban. In 1998, guy by the name of Osama bin Laden came out. There were a couple of bombings that had happened in Kenya and Tanzania, and he declared his jihad against the Crusaders and the Jews. And that's what he called it, his fatwa against the Jews and the Crusaders. So we now became supporters of Osama bin Laden. He was going to take the fight to the enemy. Now, in 1996, I should just back up a bit, the Russians had invaded Chechnya, and Chechnya was a place where a lot of jihadists were looking to go and fight. And so this was a time when I was in the thick of it, right? We were supporters of the cause. I was on the verge of going to Chechnya to fight as a foreign fighter, basically on the side of the Wahhabis against the Russians, because it was cool still to be fighting the Russians. So two of my friends, actually three friends went. Two went to Yemen, one went to Pakistan, and three of them got killed. I don't even know where they went to fight. But so I was on the line, and we were consuming jihadi propaganda at this time. It was on CDs, and you could see the Chechens attacking the Russians and killing them in ambush attacks. The first beheading videos actually started to come out in 1996. So this is the kind of stuff that I was consuming, and
But not participating in those atrocities. You were just.
yeah, I did. I came close, and to be honest, very easily I could have kind of passed over across the line. But I thank God every day that I did not, and I don't have blood on my hands. That's one of the reasons why I was able to actually work with the intelligence service, because you can't have blood on your hands in that sense. So now I should add, in 1998, something else happened. I got married. I got married to a girl that I went to high school with. Now, Joanne is Polish, and her parents are still very much Polish Catholics. My father-in-law is a little bit of a racist and an anti-Semite, right? But he's Polish old country, right? And that's how they are. My mother-in-law is lovely, of course, and so I had this cross-cultural experience and bond, kind of as I was progressing on my journey. And I would say, and just kind of stop here to make the point, that this interfaith approach, I think, is going to be very important for us and necessary for us if we are to understand who our enemy is and how we are going to fight them. So I'll kind of make some more points on that. But the fact that I had this in my life made it easier for me to kind of walk myself back from the brink. Finally, it was 9/11. Tuesday morning, I was driving to work. I heard a plane hit the building. I exclaimed, Allahu Akbar. Now, usually when people hear that, something bad's going to happen, right? And unfortunately, that's just how the terrorists have made it. Yes, Muslims, we say Allahu Akbar. It's not a terrorist cry. But the terrorists use it as a cry. And so, of course, a negative connotation comes to that. And so, because again, groups like ISIS, their job is to destroy Islam from the inside, right? To wear the costume of Muslims and to make people think that Muslims are savage, barbaric animals. And it's no wonder people think like this, because this is the example that ISIS puts forward. So I did exclaim Allahu Akbar, but for us, we say that when we mean, oh my God, right? That what's happening. And so that day, I'll never forget that day, of course, because it was on TV and everybody was sharing in that trauma. And so later that day, I went to go see the bad friends that I was hanging out with. And yes, they were jubilant. They were very happy that this attack happened in the U.S. But my friend, I remember him asking, he's like, I understand, fighting the enemies and on all that stuff, but flying planes into buildings, that I don't understand. And so he asked the guy, the main mouthpiece, like, how do you justify that? And there was a pause where you could tell he was trying to find the answer. And then he eventually just said, oh, well, they're all kuffar anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I remember my friend and I, we looked at each other with that look, and I knew then that my heart was turning away from it. So I decided a few months
And your friend
thereafter.
was wrong because there were a lot of different ethnicities in the World Trade Center working when the planes hit them. And
Yeah, I'm the way that I've come to learn and define it. I say that jihad is the Islamic war tradition or the Muslim martial tradition with rules of engagement. Terrorism is to jihad what war crimes are to ROEs, right? So flying a plane into a building, you can't justify that. You cannot declare civilians of a country as combatants, right? If it's different, if it's somebody, if it's a military base, that's a legitimate target, right? People who are going to school to work, like those are not legitimate targets. So over the next few months, I decided that I don't know enough about my religion. I'm going to go overseas to study, to learn Arabic and Islamic studies and so on. And I would decide that I'm going to go to Syria to study because there was an established program for foreign students like me to go over, learn the Arabic, go into the school system. It was quite set up. So I would go over initially, and then my wife and two kids at the time would follow. And now by this time, I don't know if you've shown that picture, but I have a giant beard. I have a big Taliban turban, black turban, and wearing long robes. And I'm studying in Syria. And this is where the Islamic scholars who were there introduced me to Sufism. And Sufism, we were talking about that. The best way to describe it is Muslims are like Autobots and Decepticons. All right. There are good ones that will help other people and die defending people. And then you got the psychos, right? And the crazies. It's just like the Sufis are like the Jedis of the Muslim world, and the Wahhabis are like the Sith, right? They feed on dark energy, dark power. They're all about death. And they are really like a death cult. And so that's the way that I describe them. So the Sufi Sheikh in Syria taught me a new way of looking at the world, right? Looking at the goodness in people, looking at the common things that we have in our faith traditions. Now, I'll tell you, I'll say something now on the show, kind of. I used to study the Bible inside out to pick apart its contradictions, it's this, it's that, very argumentative approach to the Bible. And I used to just argue and argue and argue all the time. And so the Sufi Sheikh says to me, he's like, Mubin, Muslims and Christians believe, of course, we differ what happened at the cross, right? I mean, Christians believe that Jesus died on the cross, was resurrected after 3 days, and raised alive to God, where he remains with God in stasis, and at some point will be sent back again as, king of the earth, and we all yield authority to him. Muslims believe that Jesus was not killed on the cross, that he was saved from the cross, that he was taken alive to God, where he remains with God in stasis until a time appointed where he will be sent back again as a king. So he goes, at the end of it, we both agree on that main thing of the second coming of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, and that we yield authority to his rule when that happens. So he's like, why are you debating the Christians then? Like, just leave them alone. So, this kind of really loving approach is really what changed my heart while I was there. I became fed up with living in Syria. I wanted to go back to the first world problems of North America and Canada. And really, I mean, the horror stories that I heard there about Bashar al-Assad and his father, and I mean, the terrible things that they were doing then and continue to do now. So I came back. I left. I came back to Canada in 2004. And the first week that I'm back, in the
Now
front page,
you were married by then.
I was married in 1998. Okay, so by now I had three kids, because I got one in 2004. I'm doing the calculations.
Did your wife go
And
with you to Syria?
yeah, she went. She stayed the whole time. She did fly back
Mm-hmm.
to visit her parents because honestly, I'll tell you a joke a little bit later, but not to lessen what happens to women who do go to the Middle East, and sometimes there are some bad situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty sure my Polish Catholic in-laws were seeing almost like a not without my daughter moment. So to ease them, my wife went back and she was like, everything is fine. And so that was okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I come back, and in the first week that I'm back, in the front page of the paper, the first Canadian has been arrested on terrorism charges. He was arrested in connection with the 2004 London fertilizer bomb plot. Mubin Khawaja, who was arrested, was one of my closest friends from the Quran school I went to as a kid.
Wow.
He literally sat to my left beside me. We used to play with those little Hot Wheels cars, and I have these memories of him. And he had siblings as well, and came from a good family. It's not like the father was radicalized or anything like that, but that's the trajectory his life sent him on. And so that would prompt me to contact the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, understand what's happened at this time. I should note, I registered with the Canadian Embassy when I went to Syria. I wasn't there to hide. I wanted them to know exactly where I was, lest something bad happened and I couldn't find my way home. So I registered with the embassy, and I had a newfound appreciation, right, for the rights that we have in the West. And so I came back effectively thinking, where do I sign up, and where can I sign up? So the Canadian Security Intelligence Service gave me that opportunity. I became what's called a walk-in to the service. They brought me on as an undercover. I conducted infiltration operations online. Way back in time before there was Facebook and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it was still, this is 2004, 2005. It was still password protected chat forums. So when we saw how people recruited others, kind of building on my own personal experience as an extremist, and now in this operational context. So I did a number of operations in that sense. What I'll say only that I can say is one of those operations became a very public police investigation. And so for your American viewers, in the US, the security intelligence component and the federal policing component is done by the FBI. In Canada, the security intelligence is done by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the policing is done by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So I was with CSIS, and this now became an RCMP investigation, and so it would become a public prosecution. And so basically, I was, given the prospect of either you continue with the case and follow through with it, or you walk away from it and it basically falls apart. So I couldn't walk away from it. I had invested so much time and energy into it. So I said, all right, let's go public. And man, oh man, that was, let me tell you, it's, when you anticipate, it's like you're right, you anticipate you getting hurt, but it's only when you actually get hurt that you realize how bad it actually was. So, going public, of course, meant that my identity was going to be exposed, which it was. I testified over, 4 years in 5 legal hearings at the Superior Court. At the same time, while I was going through this, I undertook a master's degree in policing, intelligence, and counterterrorism, where now I was able to study basically what kind of mess I got myself into, right? I was this altruistic guy trying to do it for the right reasons. My Islam is completely against terrorism. It's my job as a Muslim to stop them. But the Muslim community didn't see it that way, right? They saw me as a traitor, right? You helped the non-Muslims against the Muslims, right? And 18 guys got arrested, right? And a bunch of them went to prison, and some are still in prison. And I understand the
and you
community.
went undercover.
Yeah,
to
I was
help.
the undercover, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now when everyone found out, the Muslim community, especially after 9/11, which has been in really under a siege mentality, right? They feel that, the government is after them, everyone's after them, trying to find, everything. And I can understand both sides in the sense that after an attack like 9/11, of course, the attention is going to focus on Muslims. This happened with Japanese American citizens as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is human reaction to fear of the unknown, and of minority communities that we kind of feel are foreign to us as human beings. So
And not
so
sure who is.
you don't know, right?
Yeah,
And so that's the
and
difficulty.
I've compared it to on other shows with other guests, like when we were in the Vietnam War, that our military and allies couldn't identify between or couldn't tell the civilians from the Khmer Rouge, from the Viet Cong, who is who, and then civilians were strapping on, or if they're the bad guys were forcing civilians to strap on suicide bombs. So it was one of the it was the beginning of that kind of warfare, not being able to identify
Yeah.
who's the bad guy, who your enemies are. And so
Well,
it kind of created that. Now it's on our soil, who is who, you know?
yeah, and especially at this time that I'm talking about, like 2005, 2006. Remember, this is right after the Iraq invasion, and the Iraq invasion actually triggered a wave of domestic terrorism incidents all over the world. The London subway bombings in 2005, for example, were an example of that. The Madrid bombings, these were all in response to those wars. So you'll continue to see this interplay between religious extremism and also wars in the region, and how they feed into these things. So basically, I testified over 4 years. It ended in 2010. And then I went onto social media. I put out my public profile, and then ISIS happened. And so I kind of went back into social media. I'll basically say that I was contracted by U.S. State Department to help them understand the ISIS threat and what was happening. This is also where I linked in with the U.S. Military Special Operations Command, where I am considered an expert for them on ISIS in particular, that was in Syria and Iraq. And so we did a number of analysis pieces and some other tactical pieces that affected them in theater. So this really 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is, you can say, the ISIS heyday. They declared their so-called caliphate in 2014. 3 years later, after the bombing campaigns, they've been decimated largely, but of course they're not out of the fight. So that's been 30 minutes. I think we covered all of that, and I wanted to leave some room for questions or comments or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Oh, if I could just finish.
yes.
So because of all this work is why the Spy Museum gave this exhibit about me. So I'm really thankful to them for doing that. I mean, it's kind of good to get some recognition for it, but really, truly, I should say, since I'm on your show, that it really goes out to all those people who are working in secret without the luxury of limelight. And I'm just lucky in one sense that I was allowed to do that. And so this one is really, it goes out to all of those people, known and unknown, who are doing the things seen and unseen that keep us safe every day. So thank you.
Well, yeah, that's why museum really tries to illuminate that, and many will never be known, like you just said. Many will stay undercover forever, and they have put life and limb. Men and women have put life and limb on the line for freedom, liberty, security of the countries that we live in. And so I agree with you. When at the Spy Museum, I was so amazed that it's funny when I've told my story, where I've lived and what I've done in my life, which is, I usually describe it as I'm like Madonna, I keep reinventing myself. But I've lived and traveled all over the world to some places that most Westerners would never go, and through communist countries when the Iron Curtain was still up, and went to China just when they took their Iron Curtain down and there was like no Westerners around. Um, and people have said, "Oh, are you like Mahatma Gandhi?" you know, and actually, there's a display of her there, and a lot of women that have worked and lost their lives working undercover in intelligence. And one woman we talked about right before the show. I asked you because I got this book, and I am going to show you this book in a minute. And folks, if you have questions, please post them here. I'll try to look for those questions. But this book, and I asked you because even though I spent years in the Middle East and I did study some Islam, like most religions, Judaism, I've studied some of that. It's like I even tried to learn Hebrew at one time. There's so many facets to these religions, to most religions, that it's really hard for the layman to learn in a short period of time unless they spend a lifetime of study and research on it, right? So I was asking you this about this is a kind of a complicated book. It's a very interesting book. I think you know the man who wrote it.
Shiraz Maher, yeah.
Maher.
He was a part of the extremist milieu in the UK, left the movement and is now this professional academic superstar. So yeah.
And a lot of information in here, but we were talking about Sufism and can't say it.
Yeah, Salafism.
Saying the two words is a tongue twister for me, so I'll let you say it, especially when half of my mouth still isn't working very well. So you clarified it for me, and I want you to clarify that for the audience because there are a lot of people here, like myself, and I even have probably more of a little bit of a background than the average viewer, having lived in Muslim countries for a long time. Tell us the difference between the Salafism and Sufism.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference. So like I said, like Sufi versus Salafi is like Jedi versus Sith. All right? It's like Autobots versus Decepticons. Sufism is really about developing the personal relationship with God. There's a quote by the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he says, that he's quoting, he says, worship God as though you see him, but know that even though you do not see him, he sees you. So it's the idea of being in a constant state of God awareness. And people of other religions can do that, whether you're Jewish. I particularly have a fondness, of course, for Judaism and Christianity, because we are the three Abrahamic traditions. But really, truly, you should open that up to all people, that if they can start to connect to whatever that force is, that creative being that's out there, that people direct all their energy and attention and prayers and sacrifices and whatever else, to be cognizant of that sentient being is really the essence of Sufism. And we do it through the recitation of the names of God, always like there's a lot of singing in that sense. There are some Sufi sects which do jumping and dancing. And these are people of joy, right? It's no wonder when you look on the Salafi side, they believe that doing these things are innovations, to loudly proclaim the glory of God. They sneer towards it, and it shows you that their hearts are dark, because what else other than a dark heart would turn away from the praises of God? I always asked myself, even when I was the extremist guy, I would always look down on Jews and Christians, and whenever their worship would take place or whatever, I always think, oh, those non-believers, they're enjoying themselves in their work, in their blasphemous worship and this and that. But then, like the Sufi Sheikh reminded me, he's like, they're praying to the same God. There's only one God. That's what we say. I learned the Hebrew, Shema Yisrael Adokai Eloheinu Adokai Ikad. Ikhad. So sorry if I use the Kha because I'm trying to replace the K. It's a technical point I learned. Like for a non-Jew to recite the Shema, with a certain letter, I shouldn't. No offense, guys. But So the Lord our God is one God, right? This is what Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, quoted in the New Testament, quoting from the Jewish Bible. So I learned from this that you have to, so this is about positivity. And the Salafis, they don't do any of that. There's no dancing, there's no happiness, there's no joy. And surprise, surprise, these are the guys blowing themselves up, right? If only they could enjoy life a little bit while they're here on the ground, they wouldn't have to blow themselves up to get, virgins in heaven, afterwards. So
Yeah.
it's almost like they've created this impossible situation for them to live in the modern world, and it's no wonder people are moving away from it.
We talked about also in Saudi Arabia, they are Salafis and Houthis, Huwabis, right? Can't say it. I still have some nerves that have not regenerated from that. So, um,
The Khawarij.
yeah. So talk about that because it is once again confusing. And in Saudi Arabia, we have a kingdom that has a royal leadership, royal family, kingship, and we have religious leaders, and the two are not the same. Unlike Iran, that has a theocracy at this point in time,
Right.
Saudi Arabia does not operate that way, and so there may be things that the royal family wants to accomplish or do, and you've got the religious
Okay, okay,
people.
yeah, yeah. All right, so let's go back to really the 1700s, when Abdul Wahab, he was a guy, religious reformer, they call him, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, from where the term Wahhabi comes from. He started to put out this more Puritan form of Islam, rigid, unbending, going back to the good old days of the early Islamic centuries. And again, that's mistake number one because you're in the 1700s. You can't really go back to the 700s. Time moves on and people develop during that time. So he came out at this time. This is also the whole British Empire, Lawrence of Arabia. He starts to train up these Arab tribes. Ibn Saud is one of those tribes that basically are going to become the leaders of this peninsula. So you have two tracks. Imagine two tracks. On one track, you have the tribes who are going to rule Saudi Arabia, and then you have Abdul Wahab who's going to run the religious aspect of Saudi Arabia. So the Wahhabis who came out later under Abdul Wahab would legitimize Ibn Saud or the Saud tribe as the rulers of Saudi Arabia, and the rulers of Saudi Arabia would legitimize that interpretation of Islam as the preferred interpretation of Islam. So this is what I usually say to people: is you're not at war with Islam. You are at war with an interpretation of Islam, which is itself at war with Islam, right? That's why I made that statement earlier. Is that their only objective is to really portray Islam as a savage, barbaric, beastly religion. So the point is that religious interpretations is really what we're dealing with. So not to get too technical now because it does kind of get. So you have two major sects, right? You have the Sunnis and the Shias. The Sunnis are like the majority. The Shias are the minority. There's like 10-15% of the Muslim world.
And the two
Under the Sunnis,
distinctions, and just to be clear, under the distinction, so under the Shias, they believe that their leader is a direct descendant of Muhammad, and the Sunnis believe that it is more an electoral process of who's the most qualified to lead. Is that correct?
yeah, there was it goes into the early schism of Islam, because in the beginning you had four caliphs, and the fourth caliph, his supporters believed that he should have always been the caliph, and the first three guys basically stole the leadership from Ali. So the Shias generally don't accept the first three caliphs, but do accept the fourth as their first caliph. So this is where the split happened. This is where the Shia party first emerged. There was no Sunni Shia. There was really just Sunnis, right? Sorry, Shia guys. I mean, it was really just the Sunnis. The Sunnis believed in leadership by merit. the Shias believed in leadership by family position, by lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where the split comes. Now, the Sunnis is where the Saudi Arabia, the overwhelming majority of Southeast Asia, and the Shias are in Iran and in Pakistan and some other areas. So they make up a minority. But the terrorist groups that we talk about, like Al Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, they come from the Sunni side, and groups like Hezbollah, they come from the Shia side, from the Iran side. So that's really the different sects and the
Mm-hmm.
different groups. It gets also political because in Lebanon, Hezbollah is a political party there too, which is, of course, politics connected to Israel. So it gets mixed in with each other, right? So you can get somebody like Iran, for example, funds both Hezbollah, which is a Shia group, and Hamas, which is a Sunni group, because to them, their enemy is a mutual enemy. So, kind of let's get over that part. So, where were we? So the Khawarij is a very specific term that refers to groups like ISIS in particular, like the savages and the beasts. The Prophet, peace be upon him, described the Khawarij that they will recite the Quran, but it will not go past their throats. So they will be known as zealot Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, that from their last remnants, the Antichrist will emerge. So, because we believe in the Christ, Jesus, peace be upon him, and we believe before the Christ comes, the Antichrist comes. And so I submit to you that ISIS is that Antichrist army. Now, I'm not saying that means Jesus Christ is coming soon. We pray, of course, that it is the case. But I mean, I'm not going to sell all my stuff just yet.
But
Uh,
maybe there are forerunners. Maybe they're the
Yeah, but the,
forebears.
the point is that it shows you that these are the satanic
Mm-hmm.
groups, that behave in this way, and so that's the enemy that really I wanted to highlight.
Absolutely. One man asked or said, I guess his question: are there good people on both sides? And good and bad everywhere, frankly.
Yeah, you look. There are, right. There are. You can't say any one group is this way or that way.
Mm-hmm.
And you are going to get good and bad, and people are on a journey. Even though people think that they believe something, uh, that's not necessarily true because I mean, I've changed the number of views, I've grown over the years. So maybe the people that you're running into, they might be seen as bad people, right? But they have goodness in them, right? Like there is that goodness. And what did I say about Sufism? It's about recognizing that goodness that is in every person and developing it and nurturing it so that we can, help each other.
One of the things, and then I want to play that little part that you and your father had, the exchange you had. By the way, Mubin there's this book. This is about Mubin, and there's also a documentary film with the same name on Amazon Prime. It is a really fascinating documentary, and I would suggest if you have Amazon Prime, watch the documentary. But here is Mubin's book too, and it was also highlighted at the museum, which was interesting. But I quickly wanted to. I kind of lost my train of thought now. Oh, I know. So recently, just a couple weeks ago, it seems like a month ago, I got to meet Mubin, and he actually invited me to attend a conference in Idaho. And there I met Arno Michaelis and
Michaelis.
Michaelis,
Yeah.
and I will get him on my show here soon. And
You'll love him. I mean, an ex-white supremacist turned Buddhist.
new neo-Nazi as well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, no, this guy was the real deal. Like he beat people up. So,
And
but
you
he's a
guys,
Buddhist.
yeah,
Yeah, he's
there's three of you that usually do these um, conferences together because you're dealing with extremism and how extremism can be, whether you're Muslim, whether you're white supremacist, it doesn't matter. Extremism is extremism and it's dangerous. And what are the signs, and how do you combat it, and what are the triggers for people what kind of leads somebody into extremism. So it's really fascinating. And also, you have with you is Mary Churchill.
Yes, Miriam. Yes.
Miriam.
So we got Arno Michaelis. He's the ex neo-Nazi turned Buddhist nice guy.
And he's
And then
on a tour
Miriam,
right now speaking
yeah,
to groups throughout
that's right.
Europe and Australia and wherever.
Yeah, he's the high flying guy. Miriam runs Parents for Peace. I know you'll have her on, and it's the website is www.parents the number 4 peace.org, and it's families who are dealing with extremism. So their kids have either gone off to join ISIS or became involved in some kind of extremism. And this is again why we met, Debbie, is because I mean these people they're white, they're African American, Muslim, Christian, atheist, and everyone's affected by the same problem. So it just kind of shows you that none of us are really safe from that. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you're gonna have them on, and I think your audience will love them.
Yeah, really fascinating. Arno and I had gotten into an amazing conversation, and he said, "If you want to interview me, I think we should save this for the interview because we were just kind of on a roll."
He
So
likes to do it live and raw, like he's not
I
scripted
agree
either.
because I was like asking him all these questions and about the time frame and period and the music and the culture and everything of that time. So yeah, we're gonna do it raw, and it was great, and it was really great hearing the three of you talk together. And Miriam was really just salt of the earth. She has her own story to tell about experiences she had, as well as what she is doing. But extremism comes in so many different forms, and this is what um, you had talked to me about that we need to address. And thank you for allowing me to help be a little part of that. Address the messaging. We have to take the politics out of it. We have to take, the left side, the right side. This crosses all political spectrums, all cultures, all countries, all groups of people. There's extremism in every, corner of the earth. And
Yeah, can I just want to
yes,
say
yes, please.
yeah, I think, I mean, look, especially in, if I can kind of say it this way, almost like a rising hyper secularism, okay? And then let me just use the phrase, but in this context and time of hyper secularism, I think us who are people of religion and us who are people of faith, we turn to our scriptures and we turn to our books for guidance, right? And for help. And we really, in this, with what's happening everywhere around us, we hear these horror stories and war stories and this, that, and the other. At least what we can do as people who claim to believe in God and to walk the path of Christ or Muhammad or whatever, peace be upon all the prophets, known and unknown, whatever that is, we know when something is too much, right? Because once we start to cast people aside and to block them from receiving grace as we think we're supposed to give it, then we're going back on our own religious traditions. So I just ask people to remind themselves that sometimes, and it's usually when you're by yourself, when you look at somebody. I did this, the Sufis make us do these tests. When you see a homeless person, do you look down your nose and sneer and think, oh, how sick, or this bum, or he's a drunkard or whatever? Or do you think to yourself, what happened to this person? What's happening in their life that brought them to this place? Could that happen to you? Probably could. But having this internal dialogue about looking at the good situation, that's very important for us to do. And that's how we kind of start to turn the tide back against that extremism. Just a quick second point is because of, we're dealing with the problem of Muslim extremists, white supremacists. They are peas in a pod. They exist in symbiotic union. And what's ironic is both the anti-Muslims and the ISIS, they both agree on the same thing. Islam is about terrorism. Islam is about killing non-believers, ... right? Although they're enemies, they both believe the same thing even. So it's necessary for us not to fall into this trap and to use our respective religious traditions, or if we don't have religious traditions, to kind of bring people together rather than break them apart.
Absolutely. And I believe that if you believe in a higher being, if you believe in a creator, how could he create then a group of people that all they want to do is eradicate you? Because that then it would mean he's not the ultimate creator, that he didn't create all people on this earth. And we have
Listen,
to kind of use. Go ahead.
only I say this to the military guys especially. Only Allah can judge ISIS. Our job is to arrange the meeting. That's all.
I like that. Arrange the meeting. Yeah, for sure. But, we have to recognize each other as created by a higher being, and that we all are his children. And we have to stop this, um, you know, putting each other in boxes, putting everybody in one box because they happen to have a certain name next to their name, Muslim. But that is as diverse as it is. The Christian church has many different churches within the Christian family, and they splintered too because of disagreeing on certain
Right.
theological texts. So it doesn't mean that can't happen in Islam. Doesn't mean
It
it can't.
certainly has happened, right? And that's why we
Right.
have all these different, tracks. It's the same thing. Just like Judaism, no one is safe from this sectarian problem.
Absolutely. Well, before I let you go, let's play this quick segment I have of your. I
Oh my
just
God.
loved it. I thought it was great. So we're just going to listen to it. But here it is.
But they convinced me the idea for a Muslim is to be a mujahid, is to be a fighter. The idea was you have to be an in-your-face Muslim. That was the attitude. Not humble, like this. No, like this. You young people, you gullible. As soon as you look up to somebody, you wanted to be like them. But most of the young people, as you just turned on and said, whatever they have done, they feel guilty. And because of that feeling guilty makes them into anger. And this damn thing, what we call anger, is the root cause of this radicalization. Yeah, anger is a major factor. And the ideology tells you how to let out that anger. Oh, do it by killing the kuffar. Do it by blowing yourself up. That's how.
So I loved it because your father. I thought that was a great moment. I mean, even though it was talking about difficult subject, that he got it and he understood. I mean, you know he's an elder to you. He raised you. He obviously raised a good man, and uh, he saw that, and it was just a great exchange. That anger often can lead people to extremism. And is your father still alive?
Yes, thank God he is. He's actually out of town, but yeah, he's kept me on my toes, so
Well, sounds like
good on him.
you sounds like you did a good job. And right now is a picture of your family when you were a young boy, and that must be your father
Yep,
holding you or your brother,
it's
and
me.
it's you holding you. So you are like us, and we are one big family, and people with faith, and people who want, liberty, security, and justice, and we're fighting the same cause, folks, and that's why it's important that we take the politics out of everything and focus on what really needs to happen and come together. Let this be something that unites us and not divide us. So thank you so much, Mubin. I'm gonna let you go. It's late where you are in Toronto, and I really appreciate your coming on. And I look forward to having the other two on, and maybe we can do a three, all three of you at one time at some later date. But thank you for everything that you've done and everything you continue to do. for
Yeah,
us.
most welcome. Thank you very much for having me, and God bless all of you who are listening. And thank you, Debbie, personally for everything as well. So we'll talk to you soon.
All right. All right,
Peace out.
everybody. All
We
right.
the North.
Yes. Peace out. All right. Take care, everybody. Till next time. Debbie Aldrich with Mubin Shaikh.